There we go. Hi guys, it's Miss Meyer for another episode of the Miss Meyer Show. So today we're going to talk about the Civil War.
It's raining tacos from out of the sky.
So when we talk about the Civil War, we're going to talk about it in like two ways. We're going to first cover some important people during the Civil War, and then we're going to cover the timeline of the Civil War. So it's a little different. So the first people that we're going to talk about are some people that you've known before or you've heard of. So the main thing to understand is that the United States was separated into two sections. We had the Union soldiers, and then we had the Confederate soldiers, or the Confederacy. We had the United States of America, who was led by Abraham Lincoln, and then we had the Confederate States of America, that was led by Jefferson Davis. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln, he won the presidential election of 1860, and he became the 16th president of the United States when he took office in 1861. So when he took office, a lot of people were not happy, especially South Carolina, because they decided that they did not like his stance on, allowing free states and slave states and things like that. Well, as leader of the Union during the American Civil War, Lincoln stated that his primary goal, his number one goal, it was not to end slavery. That was not the primary goal. His primary goal was to keep the Union together. Now, many people argue that the disagreement over slavery was the primary cause of the war. But for Lincoln, bringing the southern states back to the Union was much more important than ending slavery. One of his favorite things that he had said was, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And he felt that by separating, a house divided, the North and the South, there would be no way to make it unified. So at least, and this was the case at least at the very beginning of the war. At the very beginning, that was his main goal, was to really just unite the North and the South and not have, this separation. Now, as the war continued, things changed, of course. So Lincoln decided to suspend the writ of habeas corpus because of riots and local militia action. Now, what is habeas corpus? When someone commits a crime, they have a jury trial and, a judge and all those kinds of things. Well, Lincoln decided to get rid of that for a time being. He said, not permanently, just for a time being. But there was a lot, after his election, there were a lot of riots and a lot of fighting and a lot of uprising, especially with the local militia of the southern states, and also of Maryland. So due to this action, though, of suspending habeas corpus, many leading people that were against Lincoln really rose up and really started totally disliked him. And a lot of people that were very vocal about how much they disliked Lincoln were put into prison. So not only did he suspend habeas corpus, which is a trial and a judge and all that, but he also started to imprison people who, spoke out against him. And he also, refused the right of them to petition for release. So he basically threw these people into jail and wouldn't let them out. And a lot of these people were saying that they were going to kill the president and they were going to do terrible stuff to the government and all that. So these weren't just average people walking around the street and saying, I don't like what's going on. No, these were people that were very vocal about how much they did not like things and that they were going to do all this kinds of stuff. And it was really a matter of security to put them in prison. I guarantee you now, when we go to Washington, if somebody goes up in front of the White House and says, I hate Obama and I'm going to bomb the White House, you're going to go to jail. Maybe not you because you're a child, but if it was an adult, you're going to go to jail. Okay? So this is not something that was just happening with Lincoln. Now, Lincoln was initially hesitant to enlist African Americans in the Army in the early years of the Civil War. People romanticize Lincoln quite a bit. They think he and he is a good guy. He really was. But he's very romanticized. He's very, like this peacemaker who equality for all, and that's not completely the case. In the early years of the Civil War, he was very fearful of letting free African Americans and former slaves, into the Civil War. And it wasn't because he thought that they were not, the same as anybody else, but he was very fearful that the slave states who remained loyal to the Union, those were pretty much your border states, that they would secede from the Union if he allowed the African Americans to fight. Now, you see, when the United States separated and we had the northern states and the southern states, there were the states that were along the border. Now, a lot of the border states, the people in these border states, some of them felt favorable to the Union and some of them felt favorable to the Confederacy. So you called them the border states. Well, Lincoln was really scared that if he enlisted African Americans to fight on the Union, those people who were kind of, favorable to the Confederacy on those border states would decide that that whole state was now going to be part of the Confederacy States of America. He was really, really scared of that. But following the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans were definitely allowed to join the Union Army. In 1863, President Lincoln, he gave what is probably his most memorable speech, and that is the Gettysburg Address at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, during a dedication for Gettysburg National Cemetery. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg is probably the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil, and that's one of the reasons that Lincoln decided to go there, because the people who died there, all the people were Americans, not just, Americans or Germans or, British or whatever. Abraham Lincoln wanted to bring the states back to the Union with as little bit of hostility or punishment as possible. And after the Civil War had ended, Lincoln proposed a 10% plan. And this meant that once 10% of a state's voters could, from the 1860 election, had sworn an oath of loyalty to the Union, said, hey, I'm sorry, I acted up, I'm a loyal American again, they would now have, that state would be readmitted into the Union. So his plan would have quickly brought the southern states back into the Union, but it was never, ever passed by Congress because Lincoln was assassinated soon after his re-election of president in April of 1865. He was re-elected in 1864, but in 1865 he was killed, assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, an actor, who shot Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Now, Lincoln did not die at Ford's Theater. He did not die instantly from the gunshot wound, but he died from infection across the street at a makeshift hospital. The next guy we're going to talk about is somebody really cool for me because my maiden name, and for those of you who don't know, a maiden name is your last name before you're married. So my name, you guys know me as Miss Meyer, but before I was Miss Meyer, I was Jennifer Rebecca McClellan. So this guy we're going to talk about is George McClellan. Now, George McClellan was a major general in the Union Army. He was even bigger. He was before we got Grant. Before there was Grant, there was McClellan. And actually, his grave is at Arlington National Cemetery. We will see it. So George McClellan was pretty big. He gained some small victories at the same time that the Confederate Army won the first Battle of Bull Run. He then commanded the troops in and around Washington, D.C., and became the commanding general of the United States Army in November of 1861. His cautiousness, he was very cautious, whereas Sherman, we're going to talk about later, he was like, all right, let's get it done. And Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, these men were just like, ready to go. McClellan was really cautious. He was like, very, very meticulous, a very keen military mind. But that really came back to get him in the end, because that cautiousness made him fail to take Richmond in the Peninsula Campaign. He then suffered heavy losses in the Battle of Antietam. So Lincoln saw that this guy is just way too careful. He's way too careful. And I gotta go deal with Vivian. She's Okay, so now we have a little friend that's right here joining us. Okay, so McClellan had serious losses at the Battle of Antietam, serious losses. And because of this, Lincoln said, hey, you're way too careful. You really need to step it up. And he removed McClellan and took him out, and he replaced him with Grant. In 1864, McClellan ran for president during that year's Democratic candidate. He was strongly supported by his home state of New Jersey. He gained all 7 of their electoral votes, but he was not enough, and Lincoln was reelected president. So he ran against Lincoln for Lincoln's second term as president because McClellan was not really happy with being replaced by General Grant. But I mean, he just couldn't do it. He could not do it. Like, I'm a bad driver. I've told you guys this before. And I'm very, very cautious of when I have to turn. Like, if there's not a light that turns green that tells me that I have to turn, I'm really, really scared. And I'm just like, I go in and out and like stop the car, and and I'm going to cause an accident because I'm being too cautious. So just like McClellan was way too cautious with these battles, he was not taking any risks, and he wasn't making the gains that were necessary. Now, George Meade was a Union officer a lot of people don't really know about, but he's a really cool guy because he did make serious advances, especially in the Battle of Chancellorsville. Now, George Meade was a Union officer. He fought in many battles in the East, including the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863. He was made commander of the Army of the Potomac, the same army that McClellan was leading, so he was kind of like a sub-helper of Grant. Meade defeated the Confederate General Lee. He defeated him in the Battle of Gettysburg. So he was the general that was put into place at Gettysburg for the Union. Remember, that's really confusing, guys. The Union is the United States. The Confederacy is the Southern states. Meade and McClellan were both generals for the United States. And the Confederacy, we lost the Battle of Gettysburg. We lost it. And the Union general who was in command was George Meade. The Confederate general who was in command was Robert E. Lee. Okay? So Meade was the one who led the troops to defeat Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay? The problem is, this is why Grant really stepped in big time, is because he stopped. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederacy, they fled after all the casualties. And instead of going after them, George Meade kind of failed to pursue them. He failed. He just didn't do it. He just kind of stopped. He kind of just said, okay, victory, woohoo. But in all actuality, he should have kept going to end this war. Well, Lincoln again, he says, what is going on with these guys? What's the deal? So he kind of angered President Lincoln, and Lincoln said, go, you're out. And Ulysses S. Grant took full command of the entire Union Army in 1864. And Meade lost control of the Army of the Potomac. Now, Ulysses S. Grant. Now, Grant was a graduate of West Point, which was one of the highest military schools that, even today, it's a major military school. And also, Robert E. Lee was a graduate of West Point. So he became a brigadier general in the Union Army in 1861. He led the army to several important victories, including the capture of Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1863. So after that, and after the losses of McClellan and the losses of Meade, Grant was put into control of all the Union armies. So he focused on dividing and conquering, because this is a time before they have cell phones, before they have, satellite issues that they can contact one another. Grant knew that by dividing the big sections of this army, it would be easier to take them out. So Grant defeated the leader, Robert E. Lee. He defeated him. He defeated these armies. He put into place lots of strategies that were very, very well utilized, which we're going to talk about in a second. And Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, ending the war in 1865. The next guy we're going to talk about is Sherman. Now, Sherman is, he's major. Okay? Talk about no nonsense. He didn't care. Okay? He did not care. William Teshemish Sherman, he was a Union general who led a campaign called the March to the Sea. And basically what the March to the Sea was is that his army created a path of destruction between Atlanta and the Atlantic coast. So he was like burning and destroying, just running the people out of their homes. Y'all know, I don't know if I've ever told you guys this, I probably never have, but my favorite movie is Gone with the Wind, and that famous scene where Rhett and Scarlett are in the carriage, and everything's burning around them, and they're flying away. That's Sherman. He's coming, and he's burning things, and they're trying to escape. Sherman's army destroyed anything, houses, buildings, everything, barns, schools. It didn't care who was in there. In fact, in Gone with the Wind, one of the characters, her name is Melanie, has a baby. She's a brand new baby. She'd just given birth. And they say, come on, we gotta hurry. We gotta get out of here. And Melanie's like, oh, no, because she just had the baby. And Scarlett says, Melanie, we've got to go. Sherman will burn the house down over our heads if we stay. And he would. He'd care. Okay? So Sherman's army destroyed anything that they thought would be beneficial to the South. They killed cattle, and if they didn't kill it, they stole it and they ate it. They burned all the crops. They burned the houses. They stole all kinds of stuff. And as you can say, like, again, Gone with the Wind, this is some just major stuff, because I watch this movie all the time. I think the last time I watched it was like 2 days ago, and I read the book every year. It's amazing. When Scarlett comes home to Tara, she says, I'm starving, Port. Give me something to eat. He says, there's nothing to eat. They took it all. Yes, they did. And then she says, all the chickens, everything? And then Mammy says, they took those the first day. And what they didn't steal, they took back on their saddles and took away. All they had was radishes in the garden. I'm telling you, it's a really good movie, and it has to do with all of that. So Sherman destroyed all these things, he destroyed railroad tracks, anything, and it was like a path of destruction, and the people were really, really scared. The Confederacy. Now we're going to talk about some famous people in the Confederacy. The first one is Jefferson Davis. Now Jefferson Davis was a U.S. Senator from the great state of Mississippi. And in fact, if you go to Biloxi, his house is actually there, and it's a museum, and I have toured it. It's pretty cool. And they actually have like slave quarters and everything that you can tour. It's very interesting. So he left the Senate after, Mississippi had seceded from the Union, and he was elected president of the Confederate States of America. Now, he managed the army very closely, and he believed that the South needed a strong, centralized government. Now, this was a big thing because one of the reasons that these southern states broke away from the United States was because they felt that they did not want a strong, centralized government, and they wanted to have more state authority. So for their president, Jefferson Davis, to say, okay, well, once we become our own country, we're going to have a strong centralized government, kind of went against everything that they were fighting for. He appointed Robert E. Lee as the leader of the Confederate Army after the Civil War. And after the Civil War was over, Jefferson Davis was arrested for his leadership in the Confederacy and tried for treason. Now, Joseph Johnston, that's a name that nobody ever hears of, right? Who's Joseph Johnston? Well, Joseph Johnston commanded the Army of the Northern Virginia, and this was the Confederacy's main Eastern Army. And he was the commander until he was wounded in the Battle of the Seven Pines in 1862. Well, after he recovered, Johnston took control of the Confederacy's Western armies. He commanded the Confederates at several battles, but he was unable to prevent the fall of Vicksburg. Johnson, Jefferson Davis saw that Johnson was kind of getting a little not able to do with his job. I mean, he's trying to recover from, a gunshot wound, when back then surgery was very primitive. He decided that he needed some real big-time help. So Johnson was ordered to stop General Sherman's invasion of Atlanta. He could not do that. He could not prevent the fall of Vicksburg. And eventually, Jefferson Davis said, okay, you gotta go. Okay, you gotta get out. So in comes Robert E. Lee. Now Robert E. Lee was probably the most famous Confederate general in the entire Civil War. He took command of the Army of the Northern Virginia after Joseph Johnson was wounded at the Seven Pines. After Johnson couldn't stop Sherman's march to the sea, he took over everything. Well, he later had control of the entire Confederate Army, and he led the Confederate troops to many victories from 1862 to 1865. He lost the Battle of Gettysburg, though, in 1863. We did just not have enough men, and we did not have enough supplies. We did not have enough weapons. It was a losing battle. Lee surrendered eventually to Grant in April of 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse, and he did it without President Davis's permission. He just said, I'm doing it, I'm surrendering. This war is over. It's a losing battle. Robert E. Lee was a realist. He was a Virginian, which, today he basically, before Lincoln went to Grant, he went to Lee. And he said, will you help me with the Union Army? And Lee said, Mr. President, I'm sorry. I cannot go against Virginia. So Robert E. Lee was a very, very brilliant man. And when he saw that there was just no winning of this war, these people were dying. And not only were the men dying, but now with Sherman's march to the sea, everybody was dying. He was killing everybody. Everything, their whole lives were being destroyed. And Robert E. Lee said, enough is enough. And he went and surrendered. Because honestly, I don't know if Jefferson Davis would have surrendered. He was pretty hard-headed. Next guy is going to be Thomas Stonewall Jackson. I like this guy only because he's got a lot of gumption, I shall say. So Thomas Stonewall Jackson was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. Now this guy was intense, okay? So at the first Battle of Bull Run, he earned his nickname. His mama did not name him Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Although in today's day and age, with all these crazy names, that could be possible. Back then, they didn't do that. Stonewall was his nickname. And he gained that nickname during the first Battle of Bull Run. And what he did is he told his brigade, he said, you don't shoot. Don't you dare shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. You will stand here like a stone wall until you see the Union soldiers come up. See, the Confederacy didn't have a lot of weapons. They didn't have a lot of supplies, bullets, cannons, guns, gunpowder. So they had to utilize what they had efficiently. And Jackson said, don't waste your weapons. You will stay here until you see them coming. Pretend you are a stone wall and don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. So his command people started calling him Stonewall Jackson. So Jackson was then made a general, and he took his army into Maryland and Virginia, where he won several battles before losing the battle in May 1862, and he finally had to retreat. He joined Robert E. Lee in the 7 Days battles and led the Confederate Army into the Battle of Fredericksburg. He went to the Battle of Chancellorsville in May of 1863 when he was accidentally shot by one of his own soldiers. He was killed by friendly fire. Really. It wasn't a Union, it was some of his own guys. Okay? All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to just talk about the timeline of the war. We talked about the people in the war, the big name people. Now we're going to talk about the timeline. So the first shots of the United States Civil War were fired in 1861. Hey, down in the front. Be quiet. You be quiet, okay? No, you be quiet.
B.
No, you be quiet.
B.
Yes, be quiet.
B.
Be quiet.
B.
Here, go watch Jasmine over there. Go see. She's gonna sing It's a Whole New World. Go see.
Elmo.
No, you wanna watch Elmo? Okay, go on. Go get it for me and I'll play Elmo. Go on. Go. Get out of here. Go. Go. You listen about as well as Beast.
Beast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. And
All right, well, at least get out of the microphone. You just write in it and everybody can hear you. All right. The war was between the northern and the southern states, and it was also known as the Union and the Confederacy. It ended on April 9th of 1865. That's almost her birthday, because her birthday is April 2nd, 2013. She's going to be 3 this year, guys. Yay! In December, South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, and they did so after Abraham Lincoln was elected president. A total of 11 states seceded, and they later formed the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis was their president. In 1861, in April, the first battle of the Civil War began on April 12th, 1861, and that was at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, when the Confederates opened fire on a fort occupied by Union troops. Well, technically, this fort, Fort Sumter, was inside Confederate territory. So they felt that the Union should get their guys out of there. And they opened fire. They didn't it wasn't like a that kind of thing. It was just like a couple of shots. But the Union saw this as an act of war, and that was what, that's the first battle. The Union did not want to surrender the fort. The bombardment continued until April 13th, when the troops were finally surrendered. The Union troops surrendered, and they evacuated. They went back to Union territory. Well, by doing this made the Confederacy people be like, "Wow, we're going to win this war. See, they're so afraid of us, we're going to win this war." And lots of people started joining the Confederate Army with the notion that they're just going to beat the Yankees and they're going to win the war because they got them to surrender at the Battle of Bull Run. Well, hello, these guys were not enough soldiers. They were a very small amount. They were just manning this small fort. And yeah, they surrendered. Yeah, they left. But the bigger army was coming. Well, the first Battle of Bull Run that happened in July 21st of 1861. The first Battle of Bull Run is also known as the First Battle of Manassas, and it was fought in the South. All of the battles were fought in the South, and the Union Army advanced on Richmond and was pushed back by the Confederate soldiers. So this battle marked the first major battle of the Civil War. Well, beginning in 1861, the Union General Winfield Scott proposed a plan to limit the South's ability to trade. Remember, the South's economy was based on agriculture, and with this new plan called the Anaconda Plan, it called for the Union blockade of the Confederacy's coastline to keep the South from importing and exporting goods to other countries to get materials. Because, yeah, they had a lot of food, but they did not have other things like supplies and weaponry and gunpowder and things like that. They would require that from other countries. And with this Anaconda Plan, they couldn't do it. Further, the plan established that the Union should take control of the entire Mississippi River in order to separate Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas from the Eastern Confederate States. Well, in 1862, battles going on. In March, the Battle of Hampton Roads, it was also called the Battle of the Monitor and the Merrimack, because those were the two big ships. And it was fought on March 8th through 9th of 1862. The Union ship was the USS Monitor, and the Confederate ship, the CSS Virginia, was known previously as the USS Merrimack. They battled at Hampton Roads near the Chesapeake Bay. So this battle, why is it something you're learning about? It marked the first time ironclad are like these big battleships, had met in a battle. And it was a huge, major development, not only in the Civil War, but in the history of naval warfare itself. Never before had we seen a major battle. That's my mom, guys. Let's ask her a question, see if she knows. Hi, Mom. You're on with my students, and we want to ask you, Mom.
I got a pain in your head.
What?
I got a pain in my head.
You have a pain in your head?
My temples.
No, I haven't gotten a pain in my head today. But hey, you're on with my students. We want to ask you a question. Who was the president?
I can answer, please.
Or ask her something. We're going to ask her something that she can answer. Okay. What was the name of this? Okay. When we were in the Civil War, the southern states separated. What was the name of our country?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Who was the president? No. Okay. Who was the big general of the Union?
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. Good.
That's right.
No, that's not right. It was Ulysses S. Grant. All right. We'll call you back, Mom. Thank you. Bye. All right. Tell you guys, she knows nothing about history. Nothing. Beast knows more about history than my mom does. I swear. Jackson. Oh my goodness. All right. So, in August, the Second Battle of Bull Run, or the Second Battle of Manassas, it was fought from August. Excuse me. Can you take your Barbies and go away? Go away with your Barbies, okay?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Go away.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Go away.
No.
Ugh. All right. Well, then be quiet, okay? Shh. Be quiet, okay? Okay. Well, the Second Battle of Manassas was fought between August 28th and August 30th of 1862. So during the battle, Union forces were once again defeated at Bull Run. So in the very beginning of the war, the Confederacy is doing some damage. They are really doing some damage. The Confederate General Robert E. Lee led the Confederate troops, who outnumbered the Union soldiers, and Union forces were driven out of the northern part of Virginia because of this battle. In September, the Battle of Antietam took place near Antietam Creek in Maryland on September 17th of 1862. It was the first major battle to occur in pretty much northern kind of territory. It was still, I consider it still to be southern territory because it wasn't far enough northern, but technically it was northern territory. This battle was also the bloodiest single day of fighting in American history. Casualties were near 22,000 people dead or missing. 22,000. It was insane. Okay? In 1863, on January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln put into place the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, what this did, it announced in September of that same year. So now I have a bucket of soldiers and one Hans. I have a whole bucket of soldiers and a Hans. Oh, she's taking Hans. I don't even have Hans anymore. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, and it basically declared that all slaves in the remaining slave states would be freed. They would all be freed as of January 1st of 1863. Slaves in any states that remained loyal to the Union, known as the border states, were not set free at this time for fear that those states would secede from the Union. So while Lincoln freed all the slaves in the southern states, those border states, Lincoln didn't free them. They were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. So it's really important to know that not all slaves were freed with the Emancipation Proclamation. It's just not. Through this action, though, Lincoln changed one of his intended goals for the war. At first, he stated that his intention was to preserve the Union, but the proclamation made the abolition of slavery a new central issue to the war. However, he did not free everyone at this time. Eventually, they all were freed, though. In May, the Battle of Chancellorsville was fought from May 1st to May 5th. In 1863, and it marked the 5th time that Union forces attempted to invade and capture Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the Confederacy. General Joseph Hooker, in one of his greatest victories of the war, won. Confederate General Robert E. Lee was able to defeat Major General Joseph Hooker in one of his greatest victories of the war, but it was at a great cost. Sherman, at this battle, was accidentally shot by one of his own soldiers And he died from his wounds, and he also had pneumonia. So he died from both of them. So beginning on May 18th, 1863, Union soldiers under the... Come on. All right. So beginning in May 18th, 1863, the Union soldiers under the control of General Grant laid siege to the city of Vicksburg, Mississippi, known as the Battle of Vicksburg. Well, this siege lasted until the Confederates surrendered on July 4th. This Union victory gave the North complete control of the Mississippi River, effectively separating the states of Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas from the rest of the Confederacy. Now, Louisiana, for a fact, we controlled the mouth of the Mississippi. So by controlling Louisiana, they controlled the entire Mississippi River, completely shutting us off from any supplies that we would need. In July, the Second Battle of Fort Wagner was fought on Morris Island, South Carolina. The Massachusetts 54th Regiment, one of the first official units in the U.S. Army to consist of African Americans, became famous after this battle. Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans had not been allowed to join the Union Army, but they did here. From July 1st to the 3rd, the Battle of Gettysburg was fought. Now, this battle is often considered one of the major turning points of the Civil War. So, following the attempt to invade the North through Pennsylvania... Okay, so what I'm going to talk about here is at the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg was one of the major turning points of the Civil War. So, following the Confederate attempt to invade the North through Pennsylvania, the Union victory at Gettysburg forced the Confederates to retreat back into Virginia. They were pretty much cornered. Now, what I want you guys to also remember is that Gettysburg was probably one of the most bloodiest battles that we have, during the whole Civil War. 46,000 people were killed, wounded, or missing, making it perhaps the most important battle. And it was also considered to be the worst battle in the terms of casualties. Now, on November 19th, President Abraham Lincoln, he delivered one of his most famous speeches at a ceremony to dedicate a new cemetery at the Battle of Gettysburg. It was really short, too, and it was known as the Gettysburg Address, and it became one of the most famous speeches in U.S. history. So beginning in November of 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, we just talked about this, led his troops from the captured city of Atlanta, Georgia, all the way on a march through the South that would end in Savannah. It was like a trail of destruction. Sherman's army sent fire to towns and destroyed anything that might help the South's war efforts, including like crops and bridges, anything. And it was known as the March to the Sea.